Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and joining the program now is Don Watkins, and Don is a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. He also co-authored a book with Yaron Brook. We had Yaron on to discuss that book some time ago. It was Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government. But Don is coming on today to talk about a new project, a new organization that I guess he's founded, End the Debt Draft. Don, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Peter.
All right, so tell me a little bit more about the debt draft. What is it, and how do we end it?
Well, I mean, you've talked about it, in effect, yourself in your books and on your show, which is the fact that the welfare state, old age welfare programs, Social Security and Medicare are really going to bankrupt today's millennials and their children. And, I mean, just to give one number, right now we pay 15.3% in payroll taxes, which for the average millennial worker is the equivalent of buying a new car or making a new car payment for the elderly each month.
Right,
well,
and what you're talking about, let me just interrupt you briefly for people who forget, but what you're talking about is because a lot of people think, well, wait a minute, I only pay, 7.5% for Social Security, I don't pay 15%. Well, you do, because your employer pays the other half of it, but he's not paying for it. That's just the money that would have been paid to you in the form of higher wages. But instead, those wages are redirected to the government to pay for your Social Security. So the employee bears the full cost of that payroll tax. The reason that it was packaged the way it was to be deceitful so that voters would think they were getting something from nothing. But they weren't. They were paying for it themselves. And of course, if you are self-employed, as a lot of Americans are today because they can't get jobs, if you're self-employed, you directly pay both halves yourself. You write a check for both sides.
Exactly. And so for Social Security, Medicare Part A, just for those, your young people are making this new car payment each month for the elderly. But to make those programs, just those programs solvent over the coming decades, that would have to rise to somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. I mean, we're talking not a new car payment, but basically a new car a year. Now, nobody can afford that. And what it really does is it, the same way that the military draft treated young people as wards of the state and said, set aside your goals, your purposes, you're going to serve the state. So the debt draft is saying, hey, look, your first obligation is to pay for other people's health care, other people's retirement, and if you can squeeze out enough and to pay off, your student loans, to pay for your house, to start your business, then you can go do it. But what comes first is you as a servant of society. And I think the debt draft is immoral. I think it's going to bankrupt young people, and I think we need to abolish it.
Yeah, and it's not just the Social Security that we have to pay back, but what about the rest of the national debt? I mean, the government has borrowed money for generations, and the bills are staggering. So not only are young people going to have to pay for their parents' or grandparents' retirement, not only are they going to have to pay for their health care through Obamacare, which is asking young people to pay higher medical premiums so that older people can pay lower medical premiums. Not only are they going to have to pay that, but they have to pay the debt back, whether it's the principal or even just the interest on the national debt. And imagine what those interest payments are going to be per annum when interest rates eventually rise. We know that interest rates can't stay at zero forever. And when interest rates go up, I mean, the federal government could be spending upwards of $1 trillion a year on interest payments on the national debt. And who's going to pay that? The young working Americans are going to have to pay that.
Yeah, and as I think you're highlighting, some people refer to this as generational theft, which makes it sound like older Americans are the beneficiaries. But the fact is, nobody wins when you live in a society that the government can just take as much of your money as it says it needs. The fact is, we would all be better off if we lived in a system where we could use our own money to plan for our own lives, including our own old age. And so I think definitely young people are the worst victims of this, but every productive person is a victim. And so I think, this idea, you will often hear anybody who challenges the welfare state is accused of wanting to, throw grandma off a cliff. No, what we want to do is create an actual free society so that grandma and her grandchild can actually have a prosperous future rather than this debt-ridden future that's going to end in a really horrific way unless we make a radical change in direction.
Yeah, well, look, it's going to be it's going to have a tough ending even if we make that radical change. But it's just the longer we delay it, the worse it's going to be. But, I've been telling young people for years now that, and it's unfortunate advice that I have to give people, but I think that people should dodge the debt draft. And, the way you dodge it, is, like people dodge Vietnam. You can go, not only go to Canada, you can go anywhere. You got to leave the U.S., even if you don't renounce your citizenship. I think the first $80,000 or $90,000 that you earn offshore is tax-free. Plus, you can also get a housing allowance that could be pretty generous. So one way for young people to get out from under these taxes is to work outside the United States. Another thing they can do is just renounce their citizenship while they're young, and it doesn't cost anything because they don't have any assets. So they can escape the draft by going to another country. I just was talking earlier on the show about going to Puerto Rico. A lot of young entrepreneurs, if they want to reduce their taxes to about 4%, can come start their businesses in Puerto Rico instead of on the mainland. So there are ways right now to kind of dodge the draft, but you got to be willing to leave the United States. Just like if you didn't want to go to Vietnam, you had to leave the country. If you don't want to be drafted into this debt war, you got to leave the country. I wonder, though, Don, if leaving the country may be very difficult in the future, as more and more people want to dodge the draft, what if the government builds a wall around the United States and doesn't let you go? Or maybe if you're, 20 years old or 22 years old and you want to leave the country, they give you a bill for your share of the national debt, your share of your Social Security obligations, and they say you can only leave if you can pay this bill.
Well, I mean, I don't advocate dodging the draft so much as I'm a draft abolitionist. I think in the same way that some young people, for mixed reasons, but they stood up against the military draft and some said, look, my life belongs to me. I think we need to say the same thing about the debt draft. I think we need to advocate abolishing Social Security and Medicare, phasing them out as quickly as possible. And that's what at endthedebtdraft.com I'm arguing for. I'm talking about what young people have to do in order to create an abolitionist movement against the welfare state. So that they don't have to leave this country.
Yeah, ideally, yes. Ideally, nobody would have to leave. We can end the draft. But my point was, since the draft isn't ending, what can an individual do? You can try to end it. You can join organizations. You can protest. You can, burn the equivalent of your draft card by maybe giving up your citizenship. But, can we actually do it? I mean, that's a huge movement. And if we can't do it, at least individually, if you're sick and tired and you don't want to be inscripted into this army, and you don't want to have all of your income confiscated to benefit somebody else, that's one thing you can do now, is you can get out of the jurisdiction of the U.S. taxman so that you're not you're not part of this. But at the same time, sure, we do want to try to do whatever we can. That's probably what I'm doing on this radio show. I'm trying to get the word out there so we can get rid of these programs, so we can restructure this debt, so we can let the young people off the hook, so they're not enslaved by programs that they didn't even vote for. I mean, the young Americans, they didn't vote to enact Social Security. They didn't vote to enact Medicare. They're just getting stuck with the bills, right? Their grandparents got in early in the Ponzi scheme. They got in when it was good. That Ima Fuller, the very first person who ever collected Social Security, lived 100 years old. She paid in for a year or two, and she made out like a bandit. Now the bills are coming due, and for all the Ima Fullers who got in early, you've got all these young kids that are at the tail end of the Ponzi scheme who are holding the bag.
Well, I think you raise a really good issue, which is, well, what do we do to end it? Because so far we haven't made any traction. Part of what I argue is that the reason we embrace these programs is because we've been taught that, look, you should be a servant of society. That's what the moral thing to do is. And what I think is actually the moral thing is that you should have the freedom to spend every dollar and every irreplaceable moment of your life pursuing your hopes and dreams. And it's a complete corruption that you should go to work, struggle, And then if you succeed at earning anything, you should have to set aside your hopes and dreams in order to pay for other people's blood pressure medication. I think that's wrong. And if people see it as a moral issue and a moral crusade, then I think you'll actually see a movement of young people who say, I want nothing to do with the debt draft. It's wrong to be, it's exploiting me, and we should stop the exploitation.
Yeah. And, you're always going to have the people on the left say, well, that's just selfish. People are being selfish because they care about themselves. They don't care about other people. And just because you care about yourself and you want to prioritize yourself doesn't necessarily mean you're selfish. I mean, there are people who prioritize themselves and their families who are quite generous with their wealth. But what offends me is somebody who wants to steal my money, calling me selfish, saying, look, it's, being greedy is bad, but stealing is okay. Like they somehow justify, they say, well, you're a selfish person and that's bad, therefore we're going to steal your money. But they have no moral problem with theft.
Of course not, because again, they in the end, they don't view it as theft because they view, look, your role is a servant. And so if you're not using your money the way that we as society say is right, we're going to take it. But look, it's complete nonsense to treat a person keeping his own money as somehow not helping others. I mean, the fact is, you know what I would use some of that money for? To pay for my child to go to private school rather than putting her in a government school where she won't learn to read, write, or enjoy learning. And yet that's taken away from me by the government.
What everybody always forgets, though, is earning money is helping others. How do you earn money? Let's say I work for wages. How did I get my money? I gave my employer something of value, my labor that he valued more than the money he paid me, because he wouldn't have hired me if it wasn't a winning deal for him. So to the extent that I earned money as a worker means that I gave my employer labor that had value, and he gave me money in exchange for that. And so I helped him by selling him my labor. The same thing if I'm an entrepreneur, if I have a business and I earn money. How did I get that money? I got it because customers spent it at my business, because they purchased from me services or products that they valued more than the money they used to pay it. So my customers are better off because I have their money. Because if they weren't better off, they wouldn't have given me their money. They would have kept it. They would have given it to somebody else. So the very fact that you accumulate money means that you're helping people. Because if you weren't helping people, you wouldn't have their money, because they gave it to you voluntarily. The only time you can get money without helping people is if you steal it. And who does that apart from thieves? Politicians and government. And so that's what's immoral. Not the individual who earns money honestly by helping other people out, but it's the politicians who steal it and want to do good with other people's money. They're the ones that are selfish. But hey, we got a break, but I want to talk more specifically, Don, about your organization, about this debt draft. I mean, what it's all about. How do we join it? What kind of impact you're making. So we'll talk about that right after this break. So we'll be right back. We're talking with Don Watkins of the Ayn Rand Institute regarding his new organization, End the Debt Draft. And so, tell me a little bit more specifically about End the Debt Draft. I mean, what it is, how do people participate in the movement?
So this is a campaign at the Ayn Rand Institute, and it's really a goal to build a movement of young people and old people who care about young people to rein in and abolish Social Security and Medicare so that young people are treated not as servants but as sovereign individuals who have a right to pursue happiness. And so at endthedebtdraft.com, we have everything from a weekly podcast with some of the leading thinkers in the country today. We'd love to have you, Peter. A manifesto, and I mean the simplest thing that people can do, because this is really a campaign of ideas, is they can spread good ideas, whether it's by saying, hey guys, read the End the Debt Draft manifesto, or whether it's, hey, listen to Peter Schiff, who's going to tell you what's going to happen if we don't correct course. We really need to push the right ideas out there, and so if you go to endthedebtdraft.com, we have all the ideas and all the ideas for how to spread those ideas that you could possibly want.
Yeah, you're talking about, though, the third rail of American politics. You can't find any politician willing to stand up to the NARP and talk about ending Social Security or Medicare. I mean, nobody will even cut those programs. Nobody will even talk. Even, in the last presidential campaign, I remember what was the guy that ran for vice president with Romney? Paul Ryan talking about how much his mother loves her Medicare and how he's going to fight hard to make sure that it's never cut. I mean, these are the Republicans, the guys that supposedly want small government. Will roast the Democrats if they talk about making cuts to Social Security or Medicare. So how do you get a political movement? How do you get anybody to sign on to getting rid of Social Security or Medicare?
Well, here's one idea. I would like to see Americans who care about liberty. Why don't they start an organization, Social Security Recipients Against Social Security, to give these guys political cover so that no one can accuse them of wanting to throw grandma off the cliff, because there's actually Americans standing up and saying, I don't want to exploit my children and grandchildren.
Yeah, they're not. You're not going to get those. Those organizations aren't going to be significant enough to offset all the people that are single voter issues. When you're 65, 70 years old, you're voting for Social Security benefits. You don't care about how it's going to benefit the country in the abstract. You want that check, and you're going to vote against anybody who threatens to diminish it. I think the only chance that we have on this issue, other than inflation just destroying the whole thing, which is the most likely scenario, unfortunately, is for politicians to make a direct appeal to young voters and say, you know what, you've been taken advantage of because you guys don't vote because you're struggling, and the older people go and vote and they vote for Social Security. We need politicians to go for the young vote by promising, elect me and I will let you off the hook. I will eliminate your Social Security taxes, your payroll taxes. Vote for me. You're 20 years old. If you think you're going to get Social Security when you're 60 or 70, I mean, most people realize that's a pipe dream. But if you can promise, look, I'm going to end these programs right now and eliminate these taxes so that you can keep what you earn. I'm going to let you out of jail. And I'm going to let you off the hook from Obamacare and all this. I mean, somebody has to make a direct appeal to young people in the pocketbook to get them off their butts into the polls to vote against the senior citizens who are voting for Social Security, Medicare. You got to get enough people to come out and vote, if that's even possible.
Well, and that's the whole idea. If you create a movement of young people around this issue, which is exactly what we're trying to do, then those kind of politicians will be jumping over themselves to take advantage of the youth vote. But until we convince young people that this is a moral issue that they need to campaign for and crusade for, then those politicians aren't going to take the risk. And so I think people need to educate themselves on what's happening on this issue, and they need to realize that morally these are corrupt programs. All they do is exploit people. They don't benefit anyone.
And in particular, a natural constituency would be young African-American men. Because if you look at the life expectancy of blacks in the United States, it's significantly lower than whites. A lot of black men don't live long enough to even collect Social Security. I mean, so this is a big issue. And, also, all of this money that's taken away in Social Security, I mean, these could be assets that people could build up and leave to their children. Instead, it vanishes. You're paying all your life and you die and there it goes. If you have young children, they can get some of your Social Security. But if you die and you're 55 and you have a 30-year-old kid, he's not getting your unpaid, so your uncashed Social Security checks. You don't have any legacy. So in the minority community, particularly the black community, this should be a big issue. Why are we taxing young, poor black kids to support old, rich white guys?
I mean, why are we taxing anybody to support anybody? The whole idea of this country was you are responsible for your own life, and the flip side of that is you're free to use your wealth to plan for your future. Just so, as you said, you actually have some assets rather than, well, it's just handed over to the elderly today, and you're kind of given a pat on the back and told, don't worry, kid, you'll be able to exploit your kids someday too.
Yeah, I mean, and this, intergenerational Ponzi scheme and the whole idea that telling young people, don't worry, when you get older, we'll enslave another generation of Americans that are going to support you. Well, Ponzi schemes don't work, right? It didn't work for Bernie Madoff, and it's not going to work for Social Security. It doesn't matter how big it is or that the government forces you to participate. In the end, it can't work. The government can't take something that doesn't work and just pass a law and make it work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And it always ends in disaster. And this is going to be no different.
And I think that's why we need to avoid it. I think part of the issue, though, is, even if it weren't a Ponzi scheme. The fact is, nobody has the right to take my money. I would rather use it for purposes that I want. I don't want to hand it over to some stranger for his.
You're right. So, hey, that we got to wrap. We're coming to the end of the hour. But Don, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate what you guys are doing at the Ayn Rand Institute, and good luck with the End the Debt Draft campaign. Hey, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow. This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.